Welcome, everybody. We're about to get started. Good evening. I'm Johanna Burton, director of the Wexner Center for the Arts. And I have to say, you ever have one of those days where you're really happy you work where you work? Today is one of those days for me. So thank you all for being here tonight. I'm delighted to introduce the annual Lambert Family Lecture, even more so because of the big news about our artists featured tonight. First of all, you may have heard, Julia Reichert and Steve Bognar received the Academy Award for American Factory. You did us proud and also called out the Buckeyes. Secondly, LaToya Ruby Frazier was recently elected as the inaugural recipient of Gordon Parks Foundation's Steedle Book Prize. Kudos also to LaToya and congratulations. I'd love to say we were responsible for all that timing, but not exactly. But we are really lucky tonight to hear from these amazing award-winning artists together on stage in just a few minutes. And I should say it was a kind of amazing way in which this lecture came together. We happened to be bringing two artists together around the same time at the center who had a lot of affinities and also chose to speak to one another. So they really wanted to have a conversation, and we honored that, so that's what you're here to experience. For 16 years, the Lambert Family Lecture Series, made possible by the generosity of Wexner Center Board President Bill Lambert and his wife, Sheila Lambert, has brought experts to explore global issues in art and contemporary culture. Bill also happens to be an OSU alum, and we're thrilled that he's back on campus with us tonight. To date, the series has featured an impressive roster of cultural luminaries, including art historians, critics, and curators. Figures like T.J. Clark, Arthur Danto, Grail Marcus, Lynn Tillman, Diana Picasso, Robert Storr, John Waters, and many, many others. Tonight, I'd like to thank Julia and LaToya, not only for participating in this conversation, but also for their riveting and incisive work. In both Dayton and Lordstown, the labor story continues to evolve, pointing to the continued relevance of their work right now and clearly in the future. LaToya's suite of work about the people of Lordstown is on display now in our galleries through late April, complete with photographs, interviews, and the actual last cruise made in the factory. Workers from both Lordstown and Moraine are here with us tonight in the audience, so let's give them all a round of applause. The connections between LaToya and Julia are clear. Their fierce focus on labor, community, and the global economy both tell the stories through their work of the people behind the headlines we read. Some of you may have seen Julia's films here in the fall when we presented a retrospective organized by our own Dave Philippi of her astonishing career as part of a national tour organized by the WEX. It kicked off at MoMA and is still traveling the country. Even though American Factory is getting all the attention now and had the backing of the Obama's Higher Ground initiative, she and her partner, Steve Bognar, have long been making films about labor. Julia, Steve, and the WEX go back a long, long way, and we were all cheering on that Oscar Sunday. And I'm pleased that Senator Sherrod Brown has agreed to moderate tonight's conversation. A lifelong Ohioan, Senator Brown has spent his career fighting for the dignity of work and for social and economic justice. In November, he participated in a panel titled Workers' Right to Organize, a discussion of the need for stronger labor laws with Reichert, Bognar, and the AFL-CIO president, Richard Trumka, who incidentally will be at the WEX on March 30th as part of a public conversation around LaToya's work. Senator Brown led efforts to support workers in Lordstown and Moraine after GM announced the shuttering of the plants, visiting with workers and pressing company leadership to bring new products to the valley. He also turned up, as you may remember, in a cameo in Julia's movie, which was shot in Dayton, as many of you are aware. It was an amazing cameo. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to the Lamberts and to our other funders who support our work year-round: Greater Columbus Arts Council, Ohio Arts Council, American Electric Power Foundation, the Columbus Foundation, Nationwide Foundation, and the IMLS. We also want to call attention and thank our other elected officials here tonight, including Columbus City Council members Liz Brown and Rob Dorans. If there are others of you out there, we thank you too. And thank you all to all of my colleagues at the WEX. It takes a village to help pull something like this off. We have been abuzz all week, and it required a lot of heavy lifting. Thanks to everybody here at the WEX, but a special hats off to Alana Ryder in our education department for spearheading this effort. So we hope that you'll stay after the conversation for a Q&A with the artist and the senator following the talk. We really hope students in particular will get engaged, so don't be shy. And do know that the talk is being live streamed, so it will be archived on our website after the fact. I also would encourage you to take a look at the galleries after this wraps up. We're open until 10 p.m. with free admission. Thank you again so much for joining us tonight, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming a pretty amazing trio: LaToya Ruby Frazier, Julia Reichert, and Senator Sherrod Brown to the stage.
Well, gotta get our notes out.
Ready. Thank you for the warm applause for our two guests, who are such accomplished, impressive women. My first time, not my first time at all, meeting Julia, who is, we all were so thrilled. The only time I've ever watched the Academy Awards from the beginning to the end was that night. And Ms. Frazier, thank you for your incredible accomplishments. Let me just say a couple of words about each of you and comments, and then we'll get to questions. Julia Reichert, I talked to her the day before she won the Oscar, and it was her fourth nomination, but that's a bit immaterial to this. I remember when I hung up the phone, I was so impressed with, and I said this to Connie, with her generosity of spirit. One of my favorite quotes is when Rumi said, "In generosity and in helping others, be like a river, and compassion and grace be like the sun." And I'm not sure I've ever met a soul as generous as Miss Reichert is about her fellow men and women. And I see that in her film, and it's just a remarkable thing.
Yeah.
Ms. Frazier is the only person, I believe, in the world who won a Guggenheim Fellowship and then the next year won a MacArthur Genius Award. And there are only about 20 or 25 people a year that win a MacArthur Genius, and that she'd won the Guggenheim the year before. It sounded like overkill to me, but maybe that's just jealousy speaking. But anyway, yesterday I spoke to my wife Connie's class at Kent State, and this is a class, she teaches writing and then she teaches ethics, and the class was made up, the ethics class, of mostly documentary filmmaking students who aspire to be Julia Reichert, basically, and just to go around the table and hearing them talk about art and what they think they can do with art to pursue justice. And these two women, frankly, have done that better than almost anybody. So I'll just start with the first question. And both answer this, because you both are, your answers matter so much. What inspired you to tell the stories that you told? Ms. Frazier, you want to start? What inspired you to tell the story about Lordstown?
Well, I think before I answer that, it's only appropriate for me to ask all the members from Local 1112 and 1714 to stand and be recognized. I believe in the audience we have Crystal Carpenter. So I believe we have Crystal Carpenter, Christina and Rob DeFelice, Dave Green, Casey King and Donnie, Varner Lang, Mindy Miller, and Francis Turnage. And if there's anybody else I missed, we'll talk after. But welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for allowing me to use my work and my creativity to tell your story. I mean, this isn't my story, it's theirs, but the reason this came into being is because, like all of you, I was watching the news in November of 2018, and I saw that 5 plants were going to cease operation, over 14,000 people would lose their jobs. And I just thought, wow, right when people were being promised job security, not to sell their homes, and we see this division happening in the country, that all of a sudden some of these things didn't come true and didn't come to pass. And the other thing that made me immediately spring to action is because of my concern that the voices of the auto workers and their families and the community of Lordstown wouldn't be drowned out by the media giving preferential treatment to a politician and to a CEO and a corporation. Where were we as the general public going to hear the truth about what it means when a plant is unallocated, when it's idled, when your lives are idled, and when your families are torn apart? And so I knew if that story and narrative was going to get out into our society, I had to be the one to pick up the phone and call the New York Times and ask them to work with me to get the story on a national platform.
Ms. Reichert. Oh, what inspired you to tell this?
Yeah, it's interesting that you read it in the newspaper, just like that the plant was going to close, and so did we. With the General Motors plant in Dayton, that was now 12 years ago. That was when we made the film. My partner Steve and I made the film called The Last Truck: Closing of a General Motors Plant, which is a little bit, is a little bit similar situation where people's lives were torn apart. People felt like the rug was pulled out from under them. Their whole sense of who they are as a person, their sense of pride in their work, their sense of their future was just going to be gone. So we kind of, just like you, I mean, we live in Dayton, right? We live there. So we went down to the local bar near the plant and just started talking to people. So, but what inspired me, I think there's a lot of similarities with both of us, actually, which is that we both came up in working class backgrounds, would you say?
Absolutely. I'm from Braddock, Pennsylvania.
You're from Braddock?
Milltown.
Yeah. And I'm from a small town in New Jersey and moved to Ohio later. But we also talked about how we represent like sort of almost different eras of the sort of the fate of working people. Like my dad never finished 8th grade, and my mom cleaned houses and cleaned hotel rooms, and later went to school to be a nurse, which I'm very proud of her for that. But because my dad was a union man, he was in a union. He was a Republican, but he was in a union. And back then, that meant you had a sense you had security. Like 1/3 of the workforce was in unions. So we owned our home. We had got a new car every few years. We had vacations. Eventually, we had 4- and 5-week vacations. Imagine that now, right?
Yeah.
But it showed, the fact that we grew up with security, we didn't have books in our house, we didn't have pictures in our house, we had none of that. But we had a sense that our lives were okay. And so that just, what you went through, the deindustrialization of Braddock, is also what Dayton went through. But that was in your generation. I remembered when working class people were middle class. We're like blue-collar middle-class people. And that's what we really need. If you take the middle out of society, what's left, right? So I think what inspired me was kind of my own background, really, and not wanting, as you probably did, I never wanted to go into corporate media.
Yeah.
And you didn't either, right? We stayed true to who we are as people, because that's our strength.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
on.
that's
Yeah.
our strength, right?
Yeah.
When Ms. Reichert said that about having a vacation, some years ago I was in Cincinnati at a Labor Federation dinner, and there was there was a group of middle-aged women, probably half white, half African-American and Latino, sitting at this one table with one empty seat. And it was pointed out to me that they just had their first contract. They signed the Custodians Union, SEIU.
SEIU,
And,
right.
and I sat down at the table just to talk to them, and they'd signed the contract literally that day, 1,200 workers cleaning the offices for the Cincinnati downtown business owners. And I said, what's it mean to have a union? And a woman looked up at me and said, for the first time in 51 years, I now have a paid 1-week vacation.
That's right.
And you think about how many people in this society don't and how significant that is. Ms. Reichert, you, the thing that stunned me watching that film, watching American Factory, and that everybody I talk to, the first thing they say is, how in the hell did she get in there and get that footage? And when I asked her that first time, I want her to explain, of course, but she was so generous, and I used that word earlier from Rooney, she was so generous about the people around her and with that access. But explain that to us, how a filmmaker,
people seen
I mean, you
American
strike me as a
Factory?
dangerous woman if you're a,
Oh, no,
you know,
no.
if you're so.
I'm just curious if some people have seen American Factory, so they'll know what we're.
Yeah.
Oh, you have. Okay,
Yeah,
a
most
lot of
people
people
have
have, which is great. So, well, you know, we spent 3 years in the Fuyao Glass America Factory, and we spent actually some time in China in the home factory. And the way it came about is actually, I don't know if you find like one work leads to another. I get that feeling, right?
Every body of work does. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So we made the last truck. People loved it, and it was well known in our town. And plant closed. It was closed for 7 years. It was like a blight on our community. It was very sad to drive by there. We kind of followed it. And one day we read in the paper that there was going to be manufacturing again in Dayton. Somebody had bought that old plant. It was never torn down. Maybe thanks to you in part, I don't know. It was never torn down. So it turns out it's a Chinese billionaire entrepreneur, and we were very surprised. When through people who had helped from Dayton bring the plant to Dayton, we got asked, would you like to get in there and start making a film? And we said, wow, that could be amazing, right? But we said there are 3 conditions. One is we would take no money from the company at all. 2 is we would have to have complete access, no closed doors. And 3, we would have the complete editing rights, which I said, we never give up Final Cut, right? We never give up Final Cut. That's our weapon as filmmakers, is that they cannot take that film away from us. So all that happened. The chairman agreed. To his credit, you know, he believes in transparency. Remember that song?
Yeah.
About transparency? He wrote that song.
Wow.
He did.
That's
So, and the good part also was that during all those 3 years, a lot of bad things happened, as you know. A lot of bad things happened. But he never took that back. He never said, look, you've been here a year, you know, aren't you done yet? He was very, he was good to his word. And I respect that a lot in people. And he respected, I think, that he could see how hard we were working, me and Steve and our whole team. You know, we'd be in there sweating along with everybody else and walking those cement floors mile after mile. You know, so he saw that, and he respected us, and he never took away his permission. And actually, to this day, he's been very positive. I mean, he'll say, you did not spare your criticism of me. You did not spare your criticism of me, but I respect your hard work, and your film is fair. He feels our film is fair. I don't know, I'm happy about that. So that's how we got access. It was the chairman. And in a Chinese private company, if the chairman says yes, everybody's got to agree.
And you said to me, and I don't remember if this was in the film, that he is a Buddhist, and he said, I hope that I hope at the end of my life I did more good than I did bad.
But I'm not sure.
But I'm not sure.
But I'm not
Maybe
sure.
none of us is.
He says, am I a sinner or am I a contributor? And actually translating that word, not to go into this too much, but we had many Chinese translators. And some people translate it as criminal, and some people translated it as sinner. You know, like, did he commit crimes against the law or more crimes against his beliefs? And we realized that what he really meant was crimes against his beliefs. And I respect that. So we translated it as sinner. So.
Thank you. Ms. Frazier, one of my favorite quotes is that Margaret Mead said, "Wisdom and knowledge are passed from grandparent to grandchild," because of the sometimes difficult relation between parents and children, but grandparents to grandchild. And everything I've read about you, Grandma Ruby comes into it. So tell us about Grandma Ruby.
Yeah, so my grandmother raised me. We lived at 805 Washington Street in Braddock, which is known as the Bottom. Originally, I was born in Talbot Towers projects, right next to Andrew Carnegie's factory, the Edgar Thompson Steelworks, along the Monongahela River. And, you know, to my grandmother's credit, like, she really instilled a hard work ethic. She was like the women in Union Maids. Right? So the way that you're interviewing the women and how strong they are and their feminist views and the fact that they weren't going to be second-class citizens, the patriarchy and capitalism. That was her. And she didn't say it, it was the things that she did in the household. So when I would come home from school, my desk was in my bedroom. I knew you come off the bus, you come in the house, she's making dinner, you go sit at your desk in your bedroom and keep studying. Or the fact that she always encouraged me to do art. I was in the theater, did a lot of different plays. And so she had me playing the guitar by 6, the viola by 9. I remained in the orchestra. She paid on it all the way through when I graduated high school. So my grandmother really is an important catalyst for me being the way that I am. I mean, she walked in love regardless of how people treated her. And she endured, I think, a lot of just barbaric, embarrassing things within the community and the family. And no matter what, she never stepped out of her love walk. She had unconditional love, and she surrounded everything in the house with these porcelain dolls everywhere. And so I like wearing suit jackets and leather pants because she dressed me in all those doll dresses as well. So she's important, especially to the body of work, the notion of family, and it shows that through the arc of she and I living together with her stepfather, Gramps, who was the steel mill worker who worked in Carnegie's plant. The arc of that book starts with his death as a steel mill worker and a Republican, by the way. Gramps was a Republican. I'm like, how are you a Republican? You're a black man living here, working horrible jobs, and the company has discarded your body. What are you doing? So eventually, the book starting with his death in our home, which many of you must know, you're taking care of your family members that are sick, disabled, in your homes because our healthcare system, our elderly system has failed us. And so that becomes important, and then the arc happens in the book after 14 years of making the notion of family. It's when she dies in our community hospital. So she's born and raised from that place, and she dies in there. And several months later, we as residents in Braddock learn on the news that they were closing our hospital and going to demolish it. And they claimed that the usage was down and they were losing money, which obviously wasn't true because we've all been dying from illnesses there. And it was our own community center, our only restaurant, our only ATM machine.
I gotta say, you focus on the Braddock Hospital closing, and we also had our one community hospital just closed, Grandview Hospital in Dayton. Some of you know about that. And with the loss of the jobs, people outside of us where we see it happen, what people don't realize is not just the jobs that are gone, it's the tax base that's gone. It's the schools that are failing. It's the swimming pools that we all used to enjoy that all closed. It's the community centers that closed.
The barbershops.
The restaurants. Yeah, the housing stock falls apart. It's not just that people don't earn as much, which is, I mean, you know, people used to earn $30 an hour at the GM plant. And they started at Fuyao in our film at 12, and after 3 months they got to $12.84. This is not a living wage. You know, it's not a living wage. Even, you know, after the union fought and in our film lost, they bumped the salary to fight the union up to $14 an hour. That is also not a living wage. We have to get real about what it takes to live in this country, right? You experienced that. Like the hollowing out of your community. I mean, you captured it so amazingly.
Yeah, and I think it's important for my generation. You have to understand, I was born in 1982. And like you said, we're 2 generations apart. Well, my hometown hero is the filmmaker Tony Buba,
yes,
who has over 20 films showing you exactly what happened to Braddock socially and economically, and in terms of the civic space and belonging that was happening there. So, you know, these are important things, but I think that there's an intergenerational thing happening within the exhibition, The Last Cruise, with all of my photographs and interviews with both Local 1112 and 1714. And I think it's also what's happening here with the 3 of us gathered and speaking to each other. I mean, this is my first time meeting Julia. And I remember Tony Buba mentioning you. There have been several times that you were brought up. And, you know, The Last Cruise takes its shape, especially my conversation and interactions with everyone, through my understanding of The Last Truck. I was in the Union Hall talking with who was vice president at the time, Timothy O'Hara, who is now president of Local 1112. And you walk in the Union Hall and you see the pictures of Walter Reuther. You see all the images of every Democratic Party member and leader. This is not what I was learning on the news when I heard about the closure. It was, they're all Trump supporters, they deserve it.
Right.
And
they made too much money.
Those were all made too much money. Look at all those white people. And that was not what was in this union whatsoever. And so
I wonder, it was hard, I'm sorry, I interrupted you,
go ahead.
to get people to trust you at first, because it was for us, because people, union people, working class people, have been so stigmatized in the media. You know, you make $75 an hour and you sit around and drink beer at work, you know, those kind of things.
Well, it was things like that in The Last Truck that I was like, absolutely, I will not stand for this to happen in the visual representation or conversation in Lordstown. I will not let these stereotypes live. And that's why in the exhibition, every text panel with every portrait of every family member and every worker, you see them countering all of these stereotypes that you've all ingested and heard in the news. So I think it was important that I was listening to Timothy O'Hara and who was president at that time, David Green, show me all the history of the UAW, what they represent, and they taught me immediately, which all your films do, it's not simply about labor rights, it's about civil rights, equity, and if you bring everyone up equally, this is what will allow us to survive and also, you know, keep us together and unified. And so it was so important to just watch The Last Truck over and over as I did the interviews, because that's how I was able to understand the arc of that narrative as I spoke to each child, each grandparent, and then the fact that it's multiple generations of people who worked in Lordstown. And you have to understand, this is 53 years. They always had a product. Dave Green instated the Drive It Home campaign, which is based off of one from the early 90s, to prevent them from losing a product that they were guaranteed. And so these things became important to visualize and visually represent.
Well, those plants built the blue-collar middle class of our country. I mean, they built it. That's why we have, well, we've now lost a lot of it, at least in the Dayton area. I don't know about everywhere else, certainly in Braddock, too. And I do think it's really important to know our history. But I also feel, you touched on this, and I kind of wonder what we all think. The younger generation, like your generation, and even younger, I feel like there's a change now, because I think people are realizing that capitalism is not working. It's just not working. It's not working for most of us, right? And I think there's a move within the younger people to be interested in having a collective voice. through a union or maybe some other form, right? And who are not going to put up with the crap. Like women are starting to say that. Young workers are starting to say that. I think it's a real kind of, you're old enough to know, I mean, there was a lot of anti-union feeling for many, many years. And I think it's just turning around, don't you think?
That's right.
Yeah.
I think it's shifted, but the powers in our society arrayed against unions are more powerful
huge.
than ever, from the Department of Labor to the White House to the state legislature in Columbus.
Oh, here.
So,
yeah.
so while I think the public shift, I think there is a public shift in support of the right to organize and in a level playing field. The playing field is so far from level now, and there's no, as long as this president's in the White House, as long as the people in Columbus I mean, it's just, there's no insight. I'm hopeful for the future because I don't think they last forever. But it's clear. Let me shift to something, because you both made something that made me think about what you said a moment ago, Ms. Reichert, about what happens to communities and what you've outlined so well, Ms. Frazier, about that is in the restaurants and the barbershops and the tax base and all. I remember when I was working with Dave and with 11, 12, and 17, 14 and trying to fight back. I remember the president said, "Don't sell your homes," all that. You had commented on that. I spoke with Mary Barra a number of times, and what she didn't, either she chose, the CEO of GM, either she chose not to believe or she just didn't understand the upheaval in these workers' lives. When I remember she said to me, "Well, we're going to find jobs for a lot of these workers around the country, mostly around the industrial Midwest,"
They said that
as if
to us,
that's
too.
good enough. And Dave, as you were talking about Dave Green, I saw David the other day. He's now working in Indiana. I assume that a number of workers that are here have GM jobs, but they're away from their families. They're paying rent and
2 mortgages,
someplace and a
roommates.
mortgage back home in Austintown or Youngstown or Warren or Ravenna or somewhere. And I just don't think there's any concept for management of the disruption and destruction to community. And that's what makes your art so important. And I never met, Ms. Frazier and I never met till tonight. And I asked her, I said, I may ask you a question about the sense of betrayal towards the president, that more workers are seeing, that Trump has betrayed workers. And I mentioned that to her, and tell them what you said to me.
Well, I don't think it's necessary to speak directly against the president. I think what's important is the counterbalance, the counter narrative to it. For example, I think one of the things that horrified me and made me concerned was that it was so easy to send out a misleading tweet. And the domino effect, psychologically, emotionally, that created, especially within Dave Green and his family, I didn't think it was something that should have been glossed over. So when that happened, his birthday was coming up. I go to visit him. I know it was uncomfortable for him. He probably hates that I even tell this story. But there's a power in what happened. Instead of me being reactionary saying anything, I just went directly to his family in their living room. I sat down and I talked to them for a few hours. And it was his daughters, it was Kate, it was Allison that responded, right? One of his daughters in particular challenged the president herself and wrote, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but my father has nothing to do with this. He's a charismatic union leader." And of course, he had no reply. And it's that kind of non-answer, being challenged by someone who is a millennial, that I think speaks volumes. And why it's important as artists that we don't worry about the state and the system and the politicians that have the biggest platforms. It is my job to elevate the voice and the representation of people who the only time corporations and politicians come around, frankly, is when they want to use them. And for me, what I'm saying in this exhibition, instead of being at home waiting for the television to put on a politician that sounds like you, continue to have the conversations within your community and the conversations that you're having over dinner when you're worried about the lights, the gas, the bills, how you're going to get to work. Like, do that with each other in the household and also with people that don't look like you. Stop waiting for a politician to parrot this and sound like this. This is not what's going to make a more equal, just, and humane society. Once we have those conversations, then of course we can hold the people we elect accountable. But I do think that if I'm able as a millennial and a woman of color to go into Northeast Ohio and sit there with people who are, yes, Trump supporters and who don't understand who's this black girl with the afro showing up at our union hall, right? Like, who the hell is she? Like, I'm leading by example in the work and I'm showing you. Like, you have to step outside of your comfort zone. You have to listen to people who don't look like you. You have to hear the concerns and the cries and the pleas of other people in addition to your own life. And I think that all of your films, 50 years of films of having these difficult conversations that get you scapegoated and stuck with so much stigma. Like, there's nothing wrong with asking to be able to have affordable living, a house, be able to afford a car, to pay to go to school, to not be in debt, to find a job, to have health insurance, right? It doesn't make us villains that we want to share these stories uncensored with all of you.
And we each have a different way of doing it.
Right.
You know, you and with photography and exhibitions and installations, and us with films that get seen on a big screen. But the idea behind them is the same, which is we want to honor the voices of working people.
Yeah.
I mean, I love how in your, I mean, I hope everybody sees your incredible exhibition, but one thing that really struck me, speaking in terms of what we do, I love the idea of a counter-narrative that we're both trying to create and get out into the world, you know, not just make it and sit back and say, well, it's done.
Right.
But we work hard to get these stories out. But in every one of your photographs, I believe every one, there's a long bit of text. And the text is the voice of that person or that family, right? So it's a lot like what we do. In other words, there's no, in our films, recent films, there's like no narrator, right? There's not like a journalist coming on and talking, you know, and giving the overview and interpreting things for you. We want to honor the experience and the realities of working people. We do it in a little bit different way, but I think that's our real goal. And I think that's because that's where we come from.
Yeah, and I also think, I believe in Studs Terkel.
There you go.
You know, I mean, oral histories of working class people, we have to do it. Otherwise, if you don't do it, some editor, right? You know, all the media outlets are owned by corporations that have their own political interests. So if we're not doing it for each other, then who's going to get that oral history out there that's not censored and where they're speaking to you as if you're not knowledgeable enough? I'm like, are you kidding me? The working people of this country are the smartest people walking on earth. And I try to emphasize that in every work.
Yeah.
And so that's why each text panel is 645 words, about 11 point or 10.5. I tried to fit as many of those words in there. And for those of you who saw the piece that came out, the cover story and the 18-page photo essay I did for the New York Times, I challenge you, go back and get that magazine, read it, and then come here to the exhibition, The Last Cruise, and then read the text that I did that didn't have to go through the copy edit, even of a New York Times, which is a more liberal, progressive magazine. There are certain things that these institutions and these corporations will not allow to be said, but I am proud that Lewis Robinson Jr. got to point out the air traffic controllers, and the New York Times ran it. And I think when people saw just how beautiful Lewis Robinson Jr. is, right? He's a veteran. He's retired 1714. He's the recording secretary. The image itself is an expression and a homage to Gordon Parks and Walker Evans, and there he is in front of this. Oh, and Robert Frank, because he's got the American flag behind him in an abstract way. And then you hear him saying, like, only if we would have just stood up when Reagan fired the air traffic controllers, we would have been able to hold on, and that's when it started to diminish. And when that ran in the magazine and people saw it, it just opened up just the floodgates of reactions and lots of notes to the editors. And that's what I respect and admire about The Last Truck and American Factory. You intentionally record them saying things that the press will never run.
No.
Never. Because they can't, because they have to be bipartisan. And just so you all know, in the same day, all three of the politicians can be at the New York Times. So Trump could be in there saying fake news, Kamala Harris could be in there laughing with Elizabeth Warren, and I could be down the hallway in the editing department. I mean, this is how it works. So if you're not aware of that, that's real. And that's why you saw the photo essay come out taking the side of the workers, and then you turn around, they've got their, New York Times has their Hulu show, right, with FX, and it's promoting, oh, Mary Barr is just trying to save the company. And it's like, really? Why don't you get a forced letter and have 4 days to decide if you're going to ditch your family and ditch your home and separate, and then show up to work 3 weeks later? Meanwhile, you don't know what to do with your aging parent or a disabled child, or to be able to find child care to wherever you're going to move, or the proper schooling for your child. 4 days to make a decision like that. And they sent them FedEx trucks at all hours of the day. To see people trembling or having mental breakdowns and emotional reactions when a FedEx truck comes on your block because you're that scared, a forced letter telling you you either go or you lose your health care, your pension, and don't even think about associating with General Motors ever again. It was the most cruelest, callous, coldest letter I've ever seen. And no time to prepare. And that's what those interviews do. And the fact that you stood out there and photographed or video and interviewed and filmed each of them come on in their, what I assume would be GM vehicles from the plant. And they're just letting you hear their raw emotion, these earnest, raw responses.
Well, I think most of our work, both of us, is based on relationships. It's not just like like TV news coming in to get something for the evening news.
Saw a lot of that.
It takes a lot of time, and it takes true interest and curiosity and needing to know. But you talk about, I'm looking at a picture from Growing Up Female. I gotta say, there's something, I'm much older. You're late 30s and I'm 73. And there's something a little bit similar. When we got started, back in, let's say, 1969, 1970, we young feminists, young women's liberation people, looked at the media. Like, I was interested in radio. I actually started in photography around the same time, like I was 13 or 14, just like you, started taking pictures. And I wanted to work somehow in film or radio or something. And we looked at all the media that was out there, speaking of the New York Times, TV, newspapers, movies, advertising, everything you saw, every image of women was made by a man. It was made by a white man, probably a privileged white man. And when we kind of realized that, we young feminists said, we have to take our image into our own hands. We have to start creating our own images. And we felt back then, you used the word radical documentary, we felt it was a radical act just to show lives of regular women, just to show a woman cooking in her kitchen. Really, not someone dolled up and whatever. We felt that we had to do that. And we also felt like you could go to the New York Times, great. There was no way we could go to television, movies, Hollywood movies, and so forth. So that's why we created back then an alternative culture. That's why we created our distribution cooperative, New Day Films. That's why Growing Up Female is like a $2,000 film, So it's just historically comparing things. I got started because of realization that women were second-class citizens and women had self-hatred and self-censorship. And that kind of got me going to try to create our own work. Then, of course, I discovered what class meant. and that I was not to be ashamed of being working class, but it was actually class when I started studying Marx in college. And just started reading and realizing that working class people are the motivating force in history. And I suddenly realized, oh, I should be proud of being working class. It's not something I should be ashamed of because everyone around me is a doctor or a lawyer or, an engineer or a professor or whatever. That's where, when I went to school, that's all there were. Because I paid my own way and was the one working class kid in the whole place. And I was ashamed of it. So, but yeah. Anyway, different moment
tell me what's
in history.
next. You've briefly talked about your next project the other day with working women.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Tell us what's next for you, Ms. Frazier.
You want me to answer?
Our names are pronounced a little bit similar the way Senator Brown pronounces them. I have that problem too. Which of this?
Ms. Reichert, tell us what's your next project.
And then you'll tell us, because I don't know yet. Well, we have a film almost done about
That's what I'm talking about, the one that you've pretty much done, but tell us about it.
Pretty much done. It's called 925, The Story of a Movement. I'm very interested in social movements and how they are built. So you all know the movie 9 to 5, Jane Fonda, Dolly Parton, the song, Workin' 9 to 5. Well, a lot of people don't know that actually grew out of a movement. And the movement already existed for 10 years before Jane Fonda said, I should make a movie about that. And so we're making, and just finishing, my partner Steve and I, a film about that movement. And actually, it partly takes place in Cleveland. It partly takes place in Cincinnati. We love to make films in Ohio. And it partly takes place in like Boston and Seattle and Atlanta, too. And it's another oral history film, kind of like Union May, and it's all women talking. It's only women talking in the film. And except the archival footage where you hear men saying a lot of really dumb things. It really puts the period into context when you see the archival footage. Anyway, that's what we're doing, and it's going to premiere at the South by Southwest Film Festival and then at the Cleveland Film Festival shortly thereafter.
Cleveland Film Festival coming up.
Coming up, like
You are
August 1st or
essentially
2nd.
done. Okay.
Yeah, first we have to finish it, but we're almost done. We're very close. Yes.
Ms. Frazier, what's your next project?
So I'm working on 2 books. The Last Cruise will become a book. In most cases.
Good, great.
And also to speak back to, the New York Times wouldn't have published me. The reason they're doing it is because I'm an independent artist creating a commission. And I think that this is important for you all to realize. We're both independent artists that choose to cross paths with media, multimedia tech companies sometimes, but we retain our ownership and rights to our work in the last edit. And the final word. So I want to make
really
that clear for all of you. We're independent working women artists. So The Last Cruise will become a book. Normally, when you do a museum show, you do a catalog. But for me, again, the art world is a microcosm of what's wrong with capitalism in general. And so in order to break the hierarchy, my catalogs or books come after the exhibition so that all of the people who are the subjects and appear in the work also have a voice in the catalog. And I want to touch on this with you because I realize programming is important to you as well. Both Julia and I, once her films are out in the world or once my work is up in a museum, the work isn't done. It's almost the jumping off point, right? The work is doing the work, right? If you're being sincere and true. So in my case, programming had to be done. Like tonight, this is a program I requested. And that's because you have to give the conversation and framework around that work and also to assemble and gather all of you together in the room with us. And so all the conversations that happened during the 40-day strike with General Motors, so me, Dave Green, Rick Smith did a talk together on Saturdays. I would do this talk. I did a talk with the UAW Women's Committee because most people don't realize that they're there.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Also did a talk with David Harvey, the geographer and economic theorist. Here, what's going to happen is I'll do a talk with Richard Trumka, Dave Green and Timothy O'Hare and students and people from the local community that want to talk about, how to use the last cruise as a platform to reach. I want to close the gap between leaders of the, labor unions and millennials, people my age and younger. Right now, Richard Trumka had shared at a meeting at the Labor Museum in Youngstown that I was invited to, that there's a polling, a Harvard case study that shows that millennials want unions, but they don't understand what it is.
Right.
And so here we have the last cruise to gather us together, right? So that's an art practice and artwork doing the work. Then those conversations are transcribed and a part of that book. And so all of that will culminate within the book so that people have it and it becomes something that is knowledgeable, teaches you a history. It'll become a toolkit. It'll teach you how to unionize. If you want to unionize against Amazon, Uber, Lyft, Grubhub, all of these companies, you'll know how to do it. And the second book is about the 5-year body of work I've been doing in Flint, Michigan, dealing with the water crisis. And this is key. I'm going to just say this one detail, and talking about, you said your work leads to the next, one film leads to the next film, same happened for me.
Okay.
Here I am in Braddock, growing up next to the factory. I know they make those long sheets of metal and steel. Okay, well, when you go into an auto factory, what do you see? The big coils of steel. I'd never seen that before. Like, oh, so the workers are forming that car with their hands out of that large sheet of steel, right? And you can see it here in the exhibition with the interview with Casey King. But what I thought was mind-blowing about my connection going from Braddock to Lordstown, seeing the steel being formed in a car, is sitting in the office and hearing someone come in and say, I'm going to take a transfer. I'm not going to wait for them to force me. And so I hear her say where she's getting transferred to, and she said, Flint, Michigan, Flint General Assembly. And I said, wait a minute. Are you aware of the water crisis? Do you know that it's not over? No. I need you to do this for me. When you go to look at your apartment, don't go into these certain areas looking for an apartment to rent. She's forced to sell her beautiful home. And I said, look outside, just about 20 miles this direction. And she was able to do that. And the reason I spoke up and quickly said something to her is because when we learned about the water crisis as a general public, we heard about it only because Flint General Assembly said, hey, to the media and to the state, the water is so corrosive that it's eating our engine parts. Oh. Do you know that General Motors was immediately switched from the Flint River water to Flint Township water to save their factory and engine parts, and that's fine. But imagine all those workers and residents that work in that plant, right, that live around there, they were still forced to use this corrosive, contaminated water. And to me, I will never let this drop because you basically have just revealed to me that corporations have more human rights than people.
Yeah.
And this is the problem.
Yep. That's a great point. Thank you for making that. I did not know that. And we both have had serious illnesses, which I know has something to do with the environment. I mean, I've had cancer twice now. My daughter had cancer as a child. You document your fight with lupus and your grandma.
Yeah.
So we know this is all something that's within our control if we had control the way we should have in this country as opposed to corporate control. I do think more and more, though, don't you, that there's like a fight back going on?
Oh, absolutely.
Fight back going on.
This is why I'm making the work, so I can galvanize, bring us a message,
that's why we're doing it, because we
SCG.
want to like expose and educate people. Like in our film, one of our films, the new one, we learned about the union avoidance industry, and we captured it on film. And that is being used a lot within the labor movement to help the population, the regular folks of America, know that there are not democratic elections in most workplaces, right? That is not a democratic election. in the plant that we documented, right? When people are harassed, fired, forced to go to mandatory meetings, signage all over the place, vote no. Imagine if that happened in our communities, right? These are not, we do not have democratic elections at workplaces, right? I mean, and that's something I hope that our film shows. And also our new film, you talk about how you have to say how a union is formed. The new film on 9 to 5, of course, those women started with an association and then decided to form a women's union, which was called 925, SEIU 925. Existed for like 30 years, so I may be wrong, maybe 25 years. But when we showed it to young people, the rough cut, people did not understand anything about unions. So we have a whole section of the film, which is how you form a union. And you've done something, we just have to start where people are.
Right.
You have to start where
It's
people are.
grassroots, right? From the bottom up, grassroots
right.
class consciousness.
And in this particular historic epoch, we have to talk about how you form, how you get a collective voice, how you get power through joining together, not going it alone. Right? You join with the worker next to you and the worker over here and say, let's get at this together, not alone. It's a simple lesson, but a lot of our culture, anyway, is against that.
Let's do questions from the audience. Thanks for your inspiring examples and your comments. So, question.
Wow. That's a great story. I'm glad you brought it up.
I guess we're coming up to the microphone. Is that how we're doing this? Okay. That's it.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. My name is Lauren. I'm a full-time staff member here at the university. I'm a previous student at Ohio State. I'm a recent photographer as well. So first, I just want to say thank you to both of you. I mean, really to all of you, but specifically to you, Julia and LaToya, and just to express the honor that I feel to have you here on the stage. And the way that you use your time, your energy, and your spirits to just magnify the voices of others is a true inspiration, I think, I would assume everybody in this room as artists. So I just want to thank you for that. So my kind of two-part question is, how has your understanding and relationship to the body evolved since you kind of have started on your journeys as artists? And how has it enabled or informed your creative ability to connect to the reality of a human experience or spirit in your work and specifically through your mediums?
It's a beautiful question.
I think you should speak to that, yeah.
Well, you brought up me having lupus. I mean, I have an autoimmune disorder because of living in close proximity to all of the chemicals and pollutants coming out of the steel plant, right? United States Steel Corporation has never repaid those of us who had to live right next to it. Not to mention, we were not employed by them, but they didn't mind forcing us to live next to it through redlining and rezoning so that we ended up having all of that pass into our systems. And so in one of the films I make with my mother, she and I actually turned to alternative medicine. And we're using one of those ion foot bath cleansers, and we're skeptical of it like everybody else. And we're like, yeah, okay, doctor. So he's like, okay, I'll show you. You put your bath here, your bath here. We'll start it at the same time, same charge. There's only salt in here. And then for 20 minutes, that machine ran. And the ion charge that sent through started pulling all of the toxins out through the pores of our feet. Just so you know, your pores in your feet are the largest pores. So you have to protect your feet. So what ends up happening is he reads the surface. And in mine, there was like a ton of yeast in my mom's, some in mine. We had a few Budweisers, the day before. So, but one thing that stood out was there was all these things that looked like pepper flakes floating on the top. And he said, you didn't live down by the mill, did you? And I said, yeah, I live right next to it. He's like, that's all metal that has come out of your system. And it is just that simple. The light bulb went off immediately and why we have to fight. Our bodies are not our own. Women have always been forced, like women gave birth to the workforce. They had to put up with everything that happened when things went wrong at work and it came home domestically. When they took the jobs, women were there still trying to hold it together. And the notion of family is really about that, right? 3 generations of Black women after Reaganomics trying to survive in a deindustrialized landscape, right? And knowing that landscape is what made it very easy for me to pivot into Flint, Michigan, where you see, again, people voted not to switch to the Flint River, and their democracy was denied by Governor Rick Snyder. All of a sudden, that water comes from the corrosive river, which is contaminated because GM pours things into it for decades. Goes into their water infrastructure, out of their faucet in their home or their laundry system, into their bodies, and what does it do to little children? Latches onto the softest tissues, which is going to be their brain.
Yeah.
Right now, there is a crisis because the children in Flint are failing. They have to get homeschooled. They show new developments. And our government, there's no price that can cure that. You've permanently, through state-sanctioned murder, killed innocent children. And so this is how, once you get a visual record or a film or a video or an artwork that can encapsulate that for you, like you hold on to that and you let that be the thing that guides you. And this is also the same thing that allows me to enter into people's homes and have these, really candid and intimate conversations.
Next question.
Really good answer, yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Brento Taha. I'm a graduate student at the College of Public Health. So I've been working on a documentary on Black infant mortality in Ohio, and it took me 4 years, and I just finished it like 2 weeks ago. So I've
Wow.
Thank you. Thanks. So my question is for Julia. I've been struggling with the concept of you make this thing and you care about it a lot, but now you have to make people care about it. And so LaToya, you mentioned like programming and like you finished it, but now you've entered this is the beginning, and now you have to make the difference. So I was wondering,
right.
as a filmmaker, this is my first film, how do you navigate that gauging when this film has reached its potential, to making the difference that I hoped it would? That kind of thing.
Well, since you've made a film about the subject, you know a lot about it, right? You know a whole lot about it. So you go to people who teach it, who are activists around the subject. You show them your film. You see if they say, this is great, we'd like to use it. You get them to write you a quote. Dr. So-and-so from OSU says, this film is really great. And then you can use, no, seriously, that's what I do, right? First of all, you make sure that they actually think it's useful, which they'll tell you. And if it's not, maybe you need to change it a little bit. I've had to go through that. So you figure out who's your audience, you go to that audience, and you find a way to engage them, to talk about it, to create meetings about it, bring people together, classrooms, conferences. It could be, this is a national issue, it's not just a local issue.
Yeah.
So are there organizations that fight around this? You must think about this, right? What are the organizations? Where do they have conferences? America is a very organized country, right? We are, actually. We love to go to meetings, have conferences. So you got to get to those people and, step by step. But it is a process. It's a long process. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, and I hope you have a long view. To me, it's like there's a circle. You make the film, and then you get it to people, right? It's a circle. It doesn't just end with, you don't want your film to sit on the shelf. Yeah. That's not why you made it. And if you have helpers, if you have friends who care about the subject, or if you can find champions, like another, again, an activist, someone who cares about it, and they will take it forward with you, that's even better. I mean, I don't know what you would say.
And this is on infant mortality?
Yeah, specifically Black infant mortality.
Black infant
and
mortality.
So I shot the cover story for the essay that caused the national debate, which caused Governor Cuomo to put doulas on Medicaid to start to help prevent some of the discrepancies between doctors and when women say, I think it's worse than cramps, right? When it really is preeclampsia, right? I think that you should pull that article up, reach out to the woman that originally wrote it, that I shot the images for to go with that essay. Within it, it revealed, so the Birthmark Doula Collective, they're in New Orleans. They're the ones, LaToya is the one that's in the photograph that I made with Simone Landrum. Simone is the one on the cover of the New York Times. And the piece was written by Linda Villarosa. Email her tomorrow, because Linda Linda will point you to all the other people. Okay. But just by me doing that essay with her, you have Governor Cuomo being the first person to say, we're going to create a pilot program to make doulas a part of Medicaid in this country. Call his office, call Linda Villarosa, look at all the fights and debates and the sharing that happened online when the article went online. You're going to find the conversation there. There are conferences. So really, I think in order to counter infant mortality, you have to go to the doulas and let that community embrace you. Look for the women that have, I know in Cleveland, there's the Birthing Beautiful family.
Yeah, they're in the documentary.
I interviewed her.
Yeah, Kristen.
I interviewed her, Kristen, and then I asked Case Western, why haven't you done anything for her? So you need to be in conversation with her, present the work, reach out to some of these writers, ask them to interview you, get that up online, and that will start to bring the audience to you and the ability to show it in other venues.
I would talk I did a roundtable today at the John Mahoney Health Center with Senator Tavares and a group of, it was on African-American maternal mortality and how rates have gone up infant mortality, one of the few countries in the world where they've gone up, and it's significantly worse, obviously, for women of color. And I would reach out to public health officials in any of the counties or communities you have any kind of connection into.
Get the ball rolling.
I will. Good. Thank you.
Like LaToya said, tomorrow.
All right.
I mean it, do it. You got to have the courage to reach out. Don't be afraid.
I'm from the Lordstown community, and one of the impacts that closure has had, and I'm sure it's the same in Moraine, is the devastating impact upon families and splitting of families. And you touched upon it, and I wish you would just elaborate a little bit more. And Senator Brown, I want to thank you for your lifelong service on behalf of organized labor and the working class. And I think there is only one other U.S. Senator that equals that dedication, and he's running for the presidency of the United States. And I'm hoping that you will endorse his candidacy.
Hold on. Everybody, that is Warner Lang that just asked the question at the mic. This is the man, the spirit, the individual who stood out there for 45 days and had a vigil every day out there on Bailey Road to give a voice when the workers were being silenced by General Motors. Warner Lang.
Hi, my name's Steph Carlock. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as I once said to Sherrod Brown when we met earlier. I'm specifically from West Mifflin, so right across the river from Braddock, Kennywood Park. And I just recently graduated from Ohio State, and my question is, as someone who's young and just finding, my way through the world, what was your path? How did you find your voice and the way that you wanted to see the change, or make the change you wanted to see in the world?
Wow, that's a long question, huh?
You're a veteran at it.
I am a veteran.
She is.
There's so many different ways to answer that, but part of it is just putting one foot in front of the other and surviving, because sometimes that's in question. I think when I think back, I think it has a lot to do with finding sisterhood and finding solidarity, let's say, in a broader sense, with others. And sometimes having to go against, like really stand up against. I had to stand up against men a lot. I don't know if that's so much an issue anymore. I bet it is. So, so I don't know what to say. I mean, I think both of us have been sort of, I developed a sense of like what matters to me, like more or less in college. For me, it was in the 60s and the time of great movements. I developed that sense of what matters to me. And whenever I've had big decisions in my life, I always go for what are my principles. Not about money, not about fame, not about, going Hollywood, getting an agent, or any of that stuff. It was all about why am I doing what I'm doing? And just sticking with that, and not be drawn away by all kinds of outside stuff, just sticking with my inner principles. And I'm sure you have them. And I also spent a lot of time just writing and figuring out sometimes what they were. That's really guided me in life, what I actually believe in, and not dishonoring that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi there, my name is Jennifer Parsons. I live here in Columbus now, but originally I'm from West Carrollton, right next to Moraine. So
of course.
Personally, thank you for making that film. I grew up 5 minutes from that plant. My family never worked there, but I had a lot of friends in high school and such who were
And you
from
remember
there, so-
Woody's.
Oh, Woody's Market.
Of course, yeah.
It was so good. The restaurant above, yeah.
We used to go there once a week for breakfast, right? Anyway, yeah.
So thank you for telling that story, first and foremost. I want to ask both of you ladies, and Senator, if you have anything to add to this as well, if there are, given the current political climate, you both kind of alluded to it in your comments about how heated and how divided things are currently, and I'm sure you encountered a lot of those conversations both in making this movie and after making the movie with these folks. Is there advice you would give or insight you could lend into how to have some of these conversations with your friends and family who voting is so important and who occupies both the White House and all the way down the ballot? All those things matter in a very big way. How you found strategies around having those conversations that maybe broke down some of those barriers given kind of the current political climate. Be great. Thank you.
Did you find that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to get back to what Warner brought up because we did not address what he asked us to do. But I prefer you and the senator to answer this question. But I will say this about people who are fighting and arguing with people, whether you are on the right or the left. First of all, Republicans and Democrats don't represent the diversity of what this country actually is.
Right.
Okay?
No, right.
We're being given two choices that are the lesser of evils. And they're being forced into two categories that I think diminishes a lot of their own excellence and leadership, which is what we see here with Senator Sherrod Brown, who I often think about what is it like for you in Washington, having to deal with this every day. Right. But you cannot get into arguments with people and let the media pit you against each other based on superficiality of race, class, gender, nationality, sexuality. What you actually should be doing, because I practice talking to people who are white supremacists, Nazis, Trump supporters, it doesn't bother me. It makes me a better person to listen and hear them out. So instead of saying, well, that's wrong and I disagree, your view versus your view or value or politic, what you should be doing is informing them about things. We know that our mass media, intentionally for ratings and for drama, only talks about the superficial. In my case with Lordstown, it was important to stick to the facts. Like Trisha Brown and Dave Lopez, they specifically say it was when it was time for us to have our audit for the BIQ4 audit, it didn't happen. That is a corporation strategically removing auditors from a plant that they know they need in order to get the next product. So I'm not going to argue with you about if you voted for him or not and you deserve it. The point is, strategically, that is union busting. That's a red flag. You have all the money in the world, so why didn't you let the auditors audit the plant? The second thing, when people say, oh, this isn't Trump's fault, he's the one that was bringing things back, well, you have to remember, we had a thing in place called the CAFE standard, laws and regulation. And what happened when that administration took over? They changed them. And by changing that, which basically means for every gas guzzling SUV and truck you make, you have to make a small, compact car that's fuel efficient like the Cruise. Once that occurred, that gave Mary Barr the green light to get rid of that vehicle altogether. What I just said to you is knowledge, information, and fact. And we don't talk to each other or relate to each other based on real facts, laws, legislation, and information. So if you tell someone a real fact based on something that directly impacted them, they'll go home and think about it. You planted the seed.
I agree with that, planting the seed. Yeah, people will listen more than you think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can take one more question. Is that the signal I'm getting since everybody just left it? We'll do
I don't
one.
know about
We'll
that.
do one more question then. I think that's the signal that we were getting. So go ahead. Thank you.
Keep, how did you
My
find
name
your
is
path, the
Desiree.
woman over there?
I am from Dayton, Ohio. I went to Stivers downtown. I don't
You
know.
went to Stivers?
I did.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I go to OSU for film now. But I had a question for you, Julia. As far as, because you have a little bit more insight to Fuyao and everything, and you know, like, that whole area and like company is kind of important to Dayton, and it employs a lot of the workers. Do you know if there is potential for another union vote? Because I did watch American Factory, and I saw the outcome of it.
Yes. Well, yes. You know, you have, any union has to wait a full year to have another attempt at unionizing. So so well over a year's gone by. There are, from what I understand, kind of whispers and discussions, but nothing concrete as far as I know. And you know, the way things are set up in this country to make it so hard to bring a new union in, the union has to be very, very quiet, and people who support the union have to be very, very quiet, or they're going to lose their jobs, which is what happened the last time around. The company kind of picked off people who they saw wore union T-shirts, even though that's not illegal at all, and it's not illegal to be for a union and to speak about it. You can't do it while you're working. You can do it at lunch and on breaks. So if there were something going on, if there is something going on, I haven't heard about it. I haven't heard about it. I certainly hope there is, but I don't know.
I think that, and I would add to that, I don't know in that case, and I think you're probably right. There are a number of fairly major organizing drives going around the country. I think the labor movement is re-energized, understanding that the National Labor Relations Board and the people, then there's they don't use Pinkerton anymore to beat up people, to defeat unions, but it's a whole very well-funded industry, both to defeat union drives in individual plants and individual industries, and to lobby Congress and the president and the NLRB to continue to make it more and more and more difficult.
Right.
I'm hopeful that is about to change, but I do see a real change from a lot of people that want to join unions. I see more people in picket lines. I often will engage with the potential bargaining unit if the union asks me to. Sometimes I'll call management and ask them to back off, to accept. There's a new plant. It's going to be across the street from Lordstown, started by South Koreans. I met with them this week and asked them to accept the union. They kind of pointed to GM because it's a joint venture, and we're going to keep on them. There's a big drive about to happen in Delta with flight attendants where the election was lost, razor-thin loss, about 2 or 3 years ago when the two airlines, Delta and Northwest, merged. Keep your eyes open on that, and if you're on a plane and you see a Delta flight attendant, say, I hope you join the union. Speak out for them. Look for opportunities to support workers when you know in a community that there is about to be an organizing drive. Thank you for asking that.
And I would also say, you know, we should always ask our potentially elected officials, you know, what is their stand on labor law? What are they going to fight for? Because you're a Democrat, and I think you're wonderful, and I've always supported you. But, and I've given money to your campaign, but a lot of your fellow Democrats will take money from unions and then do nothing. And that's what has discouraged, I think, the last election. That's one of the things that made people discouraged, is that Democrats did not fight for working class people, did not fight for unions, did not fight to help unions get formed. Democrats did not fight enough. Maybe you did, but you, you know, but if we don't, if we, the Democrats, don't do that, we're going to keep losing the working class.
Your admonition is good. Thank you.
That's a bad note to end on.
Thank you all for being here. Ms. Frazier, Ms. Reichert, thank you.
Wow.